Welcome back, everyone. Thousands of Minnesota parents struggle with the soaring cost of childcare. Many of them are priced out of the programs designed to make it more affordable. A new proposal at the Capitol aims to bridge that gap. WCCO's Caroline Cummings reports on what it could mean for you.
For working parents with young kids, childcare is as essential as any other part of their family budget. But for many parents, it's their biggest expense by far.
My spouse and I will be paying $45,384 a year on childcare, nearly 30% of our net income. Our monthly daycare costs will be more than the cost of our groceries, car payments, utilities, student loans, and mortgage combined.
There are existing programs to help some of the poorest families with those childcare costs, but there are many others who make a little too much for that assistance, but not enough to really afford it.
I help families also apply for childcare benefits every day, and I see mothers that get denied because they're over the limit. I had one mom that was very upset because she was $3 over the limit.
The federal guideline is families shouldn't spend more than 7% of their income on child care, but a recent report found that 94% of Minnesota families pay a lot more than that. The goal of this bill is to bridge the gap.
These huge child care bills arrive at a time of life when young families are just getting established, and often parents are at the start of their earning capacity early in their careers.
DFL Representative Carly Katiza-Watoon says the bill is still a work in progress. Its full scope and price tag not yet known. But she says the scholarships could range from $25 per month to as much as $600 per month, depending on how much money you make. Some lawmakers worry if the state can even afford subsidies like this in the future.
Do we have the capacity not just to kickstart it today, but to ensure that we'll be able to keep promises that we're making to people moving forward?
Caroline Cummings.
That's Caroline Cummings reporting. This is not a budget year, but sometimes lawmakers do pass supplemental spending measures. Following the Alabama Supreme Court ruling classifying frozen embryos as people, several IVF clinics are pausing operations, and now lawmakers are weighing in on the implications. On Wednesday, Alabama's largest hospital and largest fertility clinic were the first to announce they were pausing aspects of their IVF services. IVF providers are suspending these services as they consider the legal ramifications and in a potential environment where Republicans and Democrats are so often at odds. Today on this issue, they appeared to seem in agreement.
I have family members who've used that. I have friends who've used in vitro fertilization, and to me that's very pro-life to use in vitro fertilization.
President Biden spoke out against the decision yesterday, calling it a, quote, direct result of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, the chairman of the North Dakota Democratic Nonpartisan League, Adam Goldwyn, has also expressed his concern. In a statement, he says having IVF is a miracle for those who are trying to start a family. This attack is a direct result of Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices overturning Roe versus Wade. He goes on to say Democrats will always stand for individual freedom, including the freedom to make medical decisions with your doctor. You can find his full statement on valleynewslive.com.
As it enters its third year, Russia's war with Ukraine at a crossroads. I'm John Decker at the White House. That story coming up.